Okay, it's 7 o'clock, so I will officially kick off our junior college kickoff. My name is Judy Needell. I am the coordinator of guidance in the Greenwich Public Schools. I'm based at Greenwich High School and have the good fortune of working with all the school counselors at Greenwich High School and, getting to know some of the juniors and their parents. I'd like to welcome you and thank you all for being here today. Of course, when we decided on this particular date for our annual college kickoff meeting, we did not know there would be such unrest in our nation's capital. I'd like to approach this evening's meeting being grateful really for this opportunity to spend time together looking forward. We're looking forward to the bright future of our Greenwich High School students in the class of 2022. So juniors, I want you to know that we are wholeheartedly here for you and here with you this evening. I'm proud, to work with the school counselors at Greenwich High School and let you know that, we all work exceptionally well together as a cohesive team. We meet as a department every week to collaborate and to plan programs together. When counselors learn new information about programs or colleges or scholarships, we share this information with each other. When counselors need information or advice to help a student, we support each other. We all participate in professional networking opportunities with our college admissions colleagues as well. So I share this information with you to provide you with confidence that when you're working with one counselor at Greenwich High School, you're truly benefiting from the resources and expertise of the entire school counseling department of 19 professionals. Another quick item before we get started with the program is that, I know you're all familiar with our Naviance program. It is something you've been using for a long time, and Naviance will continue to be with us throughout this school year. However, we've spent about a year as a counseling department researching another college planning tool that you will hear about this evening called SCORE. We are very excited about the potential for SCORE. We think it's very user-friendly for students and for parents, and we will be rolling that out over the next few weeks and making sure that it is as robust for research as our Naviance has been for you this whole time. So this evening, we have three wonderful school counselors representing the department here. Danielle Nash is a counselor in Bella House. Christina Vios is a counselor in Clark House, and Allison Lockridge is our counselor in the College and Career Center. So to kick us off this evening will be Allison Lockridge.
Well, thank you, Judy, and hello to our juniors and parents in our Zoom audience tonight. We were just all talking before you signed on today about how much we miss being in the pack. So, we're glad you're here in our Zoom audience, and we look forward to seeing you in person soon as a group. So I'd like to start tonight by really meeting juniors where you're at right now in the college process, and that's in the research phase where you're starting to develop a list of colleges. So the college search process, to me, it's really all about balance. We want this process to be filled with hope, as Judy, you just mentioned, and real positivity. Yet we also need to be realistic about selectivity, and attitude in this process is really everything. I always say, forget about any preconceived notions going into this process about finding that one perfect school for you, and instead go into it with an open mind. There are endless options out there. There are 3,000 four-year colleges in the United States alone, and only 100 of these colleges have an admit rate that's less than 33%. So here are a few tips that I like to give families going into this process. First of all, use your resources at GHS. As Judy mentioned, we have a big department of counselors. It's so important to use your counselor and keep in frequent contact with your counselor through this process, and also to access the resources in the College and Career Center. It's important to have family discussions about college at home, but be mindful about managing those discussions in this process so it doesn't take over your whole family in the next year. So I always say maybe pick one night a week to talk about college. Maybe that's Tuesday nights. Also, use good judgment when listening to others. Parents, talk to parents who have students in college rather than parents of juniors. They'll likely tell you that they wish they wouldn't have stressed out so much about the process. And same thing goes for juniors. Talk to current students that are in college rather than just your friends. And finally, be thoughtful and focus on the fit when creating your college list. The most selective college might not always be the best fit. So before I talk more about creating your college list, I'd like to just kind of mention SCORE again. I know Judy mentioned we're rolling out SCORE, and as a department, we're all really excited about this, really because I think it's going to be refreshing for students who have used Naviance for so many years. And many districts have moved over to SCORE in the past few years. And, there's just this modern interface that's really been a big hit with students. And we're hearing students engaging, more thoughtfully with the application process. So I'd like to mention that all juniors will receive an email by Friday inviting them to activate their SCORE account. We could use parents' help in reminding students to check their email for this invitation. So students will need access to SCORE to see their college list that they create with their counselor. They'll also use SCORE to sign up for college representative visits in the Career Center, which I'll talk a little bit about later. And finally, this is how transcripts and letters of recommendations get sent out to colleges. So we really do want and hope that all juniors will be active with their SCORE accounts and within the next few weeks. And you can see on the left-hand side of the screen, just kind of a screenshot of SCORE, is the college search feature. I know you may not be able to see it too well, but this is a great college search that juniors should be using. And you can search for colleges based on location, size, major, cost, all sorts of things, athletics. But keep in mind, juniors will create a preliminary list of colleges in the junior college conference with their counselor and parents. We don't expect you to do this all on your own. This conference is about an hour long and should be scheduled preferably in January or February. Parents can contact the guidance assistant in their house to schedule this meeting, sometime maybe later this week or early next week. But before this conference, students will need to activate their SCORE account. And we recommend trying this college search feature, if you have the time before the conference, just to get a feel for it. But this college search feature, as you could see there, there's a lot of factors to consider when creating your list of colleges. So first, juniors, it's important to think about what's important to you before you really look at the names of schools. I mean, this is really a time of self-discovery for students, a time to figure out, what type of college environment do you want to thrive in, both on an academic and social level. So there's a lot of factors to think about. Thinking about an academic fit, how rigorous of a academic climate are you looking for in college? Do you kind of thrive in more of a competitive environment or more of a collaborative environment? And I always say, college is really half academics and half social. So, thinking about social life on campus, for example, Greek life. Do you see yourself joining a fraternity or sorority? Do you want to be in a really sporty campus? Those are all things, really factors to really think about when you're looking at schools. Obviously, major, many students aren't sure what they want to major in, and that's okay. But let's just say you love English and you think you might want to be an English major. There are some colleges that have, that are really known for really strong English programs. So that may be a factor when looking at schools. And I would say cost, even, more so than ever, really should be a factor when you're looking at schools. There are some families that may qualify for financial aid, and some colleges may meet more financial aid than others, or more financial need than other colleges. And some families may not be eligible for financial aid, but cost is still a concern. There are many colleges that offer merit scholarships, which are based on your GPA and possibly test scores. And so looking at schools that offer merit scholarships, and as a student, if you're more at the top of the applicant pool, you're going to be more likely to get that merit money. So those likely schools on your list, if they have merit scholarships, you might be more likely to get them at your likely schools and sometimes your target schools than those reach schools. So as you can see, there's, a lot to think about when, you're thinking about creating your list. And that's where this, beginning discussion happens in the college conference with your counselor. Once you've thought about what's important to you and you really, you can really start making your college list and developing it after that college conference. So as counselors, we want students to become experts on every college on their list. Students should really be happy to attend any colleges that end up on their final list, including their likely schools. So if you look at this bell curve, first of all, right now, college lists are going to be long. You may start off with, 25 plus colleges on your list. Eventually, we want to see them narrowed down to maybe say 10 to 12 colleges. It depends on the student, depends on the list, but roughly 10 to 12, by the early fall. And that list typically includes a couple likely schools, maybe 2 to 3 reach schools, and the rest really in that high target range. And so the key question is, how do you really determine where a college fits in this bell curve? So score application data, you will see the scattergram here on the slide. First of all, these scattergrams are not totally up to date. We're still working through the data migration of SCORE. So most recent test scores and the application data from last year are not currently in there, but they should be all up to date, within the next week or so. But using the scattergram, it's just a nice visual. You can see where you fit in the applicant pool at the specific college. So it's GPA and test scores, and you can search within the last 3 years or the last 5 years of data. So students typically like looking at, this visual of the scattergram, but we also print out application data each year and compile it into the Greenwich High School College Book, which many of you may have heard about. Students love looking through this college book. Copies are available in the media center. So when students, if students are in school and they have an open, they can certainly come up to the media center to look at the college book, or you can take them out for 24 hours. So this data can give students a sense of, like I said, really where they fit in the applicant pool from Greenwich High School. But most importantly, ask and listen to your counselor. There are obviously other factors that are considered in the admissions process aside from just GPA and testing alone, all of which Ms. Biles will talk about in a little while. So really, but it is important to, be looking at this data, from Greenwich High School in addition to the acceptance rate overall for schools. A couple other things I want to mention in terms of, this bell curve and how schools kind of fit into the target and or reach likely range is one is really important to consider major. So some majors like business, engineering, nursing, even neuroscience at some colleges are considered highly selective majors. And at some schools, you cannot be considered for a second choice major. Some schools you can. So what you might think is a target school could actually be a reach school depending on your major. So if you're planning on, say, an engineering major, for example, you're going to need more schools in your likely and target range than, maybe if you had a different major. So again, we don't expect you to know all of this. Your counselor can help you identify what majors are more selective at specific colleges. But this is also a really great question to ask when you're eventually visiting college campuses. If you are interested in a business major, a good question is, are students admitted directly into a business major? And if so, what is the acceptance rate? How selective is the business program here? And if I didn't get into a business major, can I be looked at for a second choice major? I always say those are great questions to ask in person. It's also really important to consider how you apply to a school. You'll hear a little bit later in this process, there are a lot of different ways to apply. There's early decision, which is binding. There's early action, which is not binding, but the deadline is around the same, which is typically around November 1st. But early decision has a larger acceptance rate. But it's not for everybody because it is binding. That would be a first choice school for you. But I mention it now because some schools might be a reach if you apply regular decision, but might end up being in your target range if you apply early decision. Again, these, how you apply is something your counselor is going to help you with. And you really don't need to worry too much about that. The list is getting narrowed down towards the end of the year and in the early fall. And lastly, try not to limit your options. And you'll hear us saying this over and over again. But try not to limit your options by considering schools that are those named schools that Greenwich High School students, that many of our Greenwich High School students apply to. Those schools like Villanova, Michigan, Boston College, Northeastern, NYU, Fordham, Boston University. All of those schools have around 100 applications from Greenwich High School every year, and they're receiving record overall numbers from just this overall area. So you really want to be smart and broaden your list. Find those hidden gems early on in this process. You'll eventually get a red folder from your counselor with a lot of materials in there. And there's a list of hidden gems in there that you can take a look at and, discuss some possibilities in your college conference. But, I always challenge students, find 2 or 3 of those hidden gems, be open-minded, consider them rather than just focusing on the schools you're hearing about everybody else talking about. So once you have that preliminary list of colleges, then comes the fun part, I would say. To me, the most fun part is actually visiting college campuses. Now, unfortunately, most colleges are not open for in-person visits right now, especially in January. So you need to start with virtual visits. The good news is that campuses now have robust virtual offerings, from information sessions to student panels, obviously virtual tours. They're really, even you can sit in on classes virtually. There's different department webinars that you can attend. So you really can get a pretty good sense of a school now virtually. And attendance at these virtual events are a great way of showing demonstrated interest. And more importantly, we'll decide if you want to visit in person. So my suggestion is, spend the next 2 months, maybe 3 months, registering and participating in some virtual events, and then planning for your in-person visits later in the spring and likely through the summer. It's important to check with admission offices before visiting in person. You will need to register in advance. You've always needed to register in advance, but now, most likely groups will be on the smaller side, will likely be information sessions held outside. So just be sure to, really check with admissions offices to see, when they are opening for in-person visits. And some will open sooner than others. There were some open, right before Christmas, right before winter break, and there will likely be some that will be open as early as February. But I would say more so would probably be later in the spring and then in the summer. So when you do get out to visit in person, just a few suggestions. Most importantly, visit those likely and target schools first. If you can identify a couple likely schools that you could really see yourself at, it really just takes the stress out of this process. So as counselors, what we find it really challenging is when students come to us and they tell us about all these visits they went on, and they're all really competitive schools. So it's really important to just try to visit, those likely and target schools initially. You can always tie in a reach school here or there, and certainly a little bit later in the year. But try to get some of those target and likely schools in early. Also, look beyond the tour guide and the counselor leading the information session. Some are better than others, and you don't want that to kind of taint your impression of the college. So, really go beyond that tour. Talk to students on campus, maybe connect with GHS alum while you're on campus. Eat in on the cafeteria if you can, pick up the school newspaper. Sit in on a class if it's possible. Really spend time checking out the surrounding community and, just making the best of your time there because you may not have the opportunity to go back for a second visit. It's also helpful to find out who the admissions counselor is for Greenwich High School when you are there. That could be a person that you could connect with through this process. That admissions counselor will be the person visiting Greenwich High School in the fall for those college representative visits that are in the Career Center, and also for our college night, which I'll mention a little bit later as well. A couple other just general tips when you're planning these visits. Try not to pack too many visits in one day or one trip. It can be completely overwhelming. So try to, spread them out and, try not to have them like really rushed. And parents, it's really helpful if you can kind of keep your opinions, as hard as it is, to yourself and really listen to, your son and daughter's observations, when you are on the tour. And juniors, come up with a couple questions that you want to ask when you're visiting. You can end up asking similar questions. Maybe it is around a competitive major, but think about like thoughtful questions rather than basic questions. So for example, instead of asking, what's your average class size, ask how many students are in a typical freshman class. Maybe instead of what is your first year retention rate, ask, why do 15% of your freshmen leave? Is it because there's no football team or their lack of things to do in the area? But most importantly, really listen to your gut and take notes of your impressions because, you may be able to reference that visit and those impressions potentially in supplemental essay questions that you'll need to write or even in an interview. And eventually, a lot of these visits will kind of blend in after you've done a lot of them. And it's hard to remember, what school you saw this versus this. So, take some notes of your impressions. But really, most importantly, families should make every effort to have fun with these visits. This really is the most exciting time in the process. So, you really want to try to make the most of the time that you have when you do get to visit in person. So I'm going to turn it over to Mrs. Bios, who's going to talk about really what's considered in the application process. So I'll turn it over to you.
Good evening, everybody. I first would like to start with saying that I'm going to speak to many of the items considered in the college process as though this is a normal non-pandemic year, and then share notes about what we found over the course of the 2020-2021 academic year and application period. So colleges share with us that they complete the application review of each applicant with a holistic process. And this process includes the review of several items, which I will discuss over the course of this presentation. Transcripts are probably one of the most important factors considered by colleges, especially over this past year. The transcript is a report for every high school course a student has completed while attending Greenwich High School, which contains the grade as well as the amount of credits that the student earned when completing the course. This document also contains the amount of credits students earn over their time at Greenwich High School and the student's cumulative GPA. The cumulative GPA is calculated at the end of every course, the GPA, the student's final grade, and then their GPA are calculated at the end of every course based on the student's final grades. Right now, juniors have a 4-semester GPA. That's because they had their first semester, which was their freshman year. The second semester was the second half of their freshman year. Then they had a 3-semester GPA at the end of first semester sophomore year. And then 4-semester GPA was at the end of sophomore year. So basically, at the end of January, when the semester is complete this year, they will have a 5-semester GPA. But when they're applying to colleges, they will have a 6-semester GPA. And this is because they would have completed 3 years of high school. The only courses that are not included in a grade point average are their PE courses. So aside from the transcript, many students will say, when are my grades being sent? First quarter grades are actually only sent if a student requests them to be sent. Typically, it's around the first or second week of November, and the guidance secretaries will send an email to all students if they would like to send their first quarter grades. I strongly recommend, if students or families have any questions, to talk with their school counselor, because we will be able to provide you any insight or additional information. Mid-year grades, however, which are typically sent right before the February break, are automatically sent no matter what. In regards to testing, this is where it was definitely a very different year due to COVID. Testing is something that changed for the class of 2021, and many schools are actually still deciding whether or not they will keep their test optional policy, which they adopted for the 2020-2021 academic year. There are a couple of colleges who adopted the test optional policy for 3 years. So when you're considering colleges, it's important to clarify with the colleges as well as your school counselor whether or not they are moving forward with a test optional policy, or if they're going back to the way that things were. While sometimes you may not be meeting with the colleges in person, it's also important during those virtual meetings to ask that question as well. The most popular exams for college admissions are the ACT or the SAT. Standardized tests are offered on Saturdays once per month at local high schools, and Greenwich High School is considered a testing site for the SAT. I will now go into more detail about each one of the exams. The SAT is the state exam for the state of Connecticut and is part of the Greenwich High School graduation requirements. We also hold a school-based SAT day on Wednesday, March 24th of this year. This exam counts towards student scores, which they can send to colleges. However, it's important for me to note that it only includes the evidence-based reading and writing, as well as the math sections. It does not include the optional writing section, which some students choose to complete. Few colleges require the writing section, so before taking it, look into the colleges that you are interested in and whether or not you're required to submit that score. The SAT has a highest score of an 800 on each section. So the evidence-based reading and writing, the highest score that you could get is an 800. The math, the highest score that you can get is an 800 as well, with the highest combined score of a 1600. The majority of colleges actually super score your SAT score. So that means if you completed the exam twice, they would take your highest verbal and your highest math to create your new highest score. ACT is an exam which some students prefer to the SAT. There was once a time when ACT was preferred by West Coast schools and the SAT was preferred by East Coast schools. However, there has since been a change where schools look to both exams equally and want students to complete the exam which best exemplifies their skills and their abilities. The ACT has 5 sections. They have an English, a reading, a math, a science, as well as an optional writing section. The highest score which a student can earn is a 36, and the highest composite score is also a 36. The biggest difference between the ACT and the SAT are the amount of questions which need to be answered in a shorter period of time. There are a total of 215 questions on the ACT and a total of 154 on the SAT. If you and your student are struggling with figuring out which exam is best, strongly recommend that you take a practice exam and then share the scores with us. As counselors, we could take a look at the concordance chart, which is a comparison chart between the SAT and the ACT, and we can help you figure out which exam is best for your student. Aside from that, there are subject tests. The subject tests aren't necessarily for every student because many colleges and universities don't require them. So many students don't actually need to complete them. SAT subject tests are determined on an individual basis and only are recommended if students are completing certain AP courses, advanced placement courses. Some examples of the courses include AP Biology, AP US History, AP Chemistry, AP Physics, and/or AP Math or Honors Pre-Calculus. It's important for me to note that SAT subject tests are offered the same dates as the SATs. So a student cannot plan to take SAT subject tests and the SAT on the same Saturday. This is where you would have to select to complete them on different dates or during different months. You can also complete up to 3 SAT subject tests during a single test date because the SAT subject tests are typically roughly 50 minutes to an hour in length. Aside from that, many colleges advise students to not complete SAT subject tests in a foreign language, which they are native speakers. Similar to the SAT, the highest SAT score a student can earn on a subject exam is an 800. The lowest score would be a 200. So if you are a student or your student struggles with standardized testing, there is fairtest.org, which is actually a website which has all the colleges which don't require students to submit standardized test scores in order to gain acceptance to their college or university. Like I said, many colleges for the 2020-2021 academic year have gone test optional due to the coronavirus, and they haven't held it against students. However, many colleges are still getting in touch with us in regards to whether or not they are continuing this policy moving forward. Beyond the transcript and standardized testing, okay. Nope, that's fine, Judy, thank you. So basically what's great are the personal factors and the college essay. So these are other items that are definitely considered. So aside from the college essay, or beyond the transcript and standardized testing, colleges also look at a number of other items, including the college essay, which students should begin working on and completing prior to the end of the school year. One topic is typically a topic of your choice. And this essay is different than others as it's usually a personal narrative. So sometimes students struggle with this essay, which is why I keep on saying how important it is for students to start working on this sooner than later. On the college essay for the Common App, there's a hard cap of 650 words. And on the Coalition application, there's a soft cap of roughly 550 words, which we will talk about a little bit more in a few minutes. Aside from the college essay, there are letters of recommendation when students are asked to ask 2 of their teachers, only 2, for letters of recommendation. College board and counselors typically recommend a STEM teacher, so a math or a science, and a humanities teacher, either English or social studies. This is so your colleges will be able to see both areas of study. Many colleges also recommend this breakdown for letters of recommendation. So with that, school counselors write letters of recommendation as well, for all of their students. So it's very important to complete any paperwork or surveys that your teachers or your school counselor ask for you to complete. This is how we incorporate your voice as a student and a family into our letters. Demonstrated interest is something which has taken a new turn in 2020 into 2021. As Mrs. Lockridge has said, virtual meetings, interviews, or virtual tours are several options for students to show demonstrated interest at a college or a university without visiting the college in person or talking in person to an admissions representative. Demonstrated interest is something that several colleges take into consideration when they're reviewing a student applicant and their interest at the university. So this is where it's important to come up with those thoughtful questions and ask them, whether it be finding out who the admissions representative is and emailing them directly, or simply contacting admissions in general and just asking them that question. Some colleges will actually tally up the amount of times that you attend a virtual tour or a virtual information session. So It's just something to keep in mind. Extracurricular activities are also a big piece of the process. My student families will often hear me refer to the college process as a 200-piece puzzle, and there are lots of separate puzzle pieces. So this is one of those puzzle pieces. The college applications have a place for roughly 10 activities for you to include. I often refer to this as a student's top 10 activities during their college career in order of importance to them. So please know, it doesn't mean that students have to go join 15 clubs tomorrow. It's just important, even though in this pandemic, to try to continue to do meaningful things to you. Colleges do understand that some sports are not running. They also understand that some clubs may not be running, but still finding meaningful things to do with your time is very important to them, because that kind of gives them a picture as to what type of student you will be on their campus. Interviews are something that are offered by some schools and required by others. Interviews could be by alumni, current students, or by the admissions staff. Mrs. Lockridge in the College Career Center also holds mock interviews with students in preparation of a college interview. So you could always schedule a time to meet with her. It's important to bring a copy of your resume with you to the interview. And there are also sessions where school councils will work with students on their resumes as well. Legacy is something, if a student or a family member, if a student has a family member or an older sibling who's attended a college or a university which they intend to apply, this is sometimes a factor considered by admissions staff when they're reviewing a child's application. Supplements are essays in addition to the college essay. Some colleges do not have any supplements. That's a lot of times when you see a higher number of students applying to that college. But also sometimes these essays are actually more time consuming than the college essay itself. And some of them also have the same length as the college essay, 650 words. This is why it's so important for students to complete their college essay and have a finalized draft by the end of the summer. Supplements are also a way for a college to better understand how you will be a good fit for their college. And that's kind of where you share that information, the connections that you make to that school. So when writing supplements, students often have to research information about the schools they're applying to. And that isn't limited to, but includes programs that they offer, classes associated with their major, different clubs and organizations, different networking opportunities, different jobs. So it's sort of like a why am I a good fit for the school kind of essay. Special talents are something which can add to the college process, whether it be athletics, art, music, or theater. Deadline dates can sometimes differ or either extend or expedite this part of the process. So if you have a special talent which you plan on incorporating into the college process, please be sure to inform your school counselor. I know in Clark House, we have an area on the game plan survey, which we request students to share that information. So that's definitely important for a school counselor to know so we can best support you through the college process.
Oh, you're on mute, Danielle.
Thanks, Judy. Hi, this is Danielle Nash. I'm one of the counselors in Bella House. I'm going to talk to you about the role of the student, the counselor, and the parents. One of our former counselors used to say, it's like going to watch a game. The students are the players. They get to go out on the field. They're taking all of the action. The school counselors are there to coach them. They can go onto the field to provide some on-the-spot support when needed. And the parents are like the owners. They stay off the field, they pay, they give some high view oversight of the process. And I always thought that was a great analogy. So we'll start with the role of the student. This is really the student's process. So it's super important that the students take ownership of the college process. Obviously, we just spent a great bit of time talking about all of the researching and the list development, and that really, should be driven by the students themselves. Parents and counselors are here to talk through ideas and criteria with the kids, but we really want the kids to be the ones, the students, taking the driver's seat, making sure that their priorities for what they're looking for in a college are at the forefront of what everybody is looking for, even if that's something a little bit crazy or off to the side. Some of I'm the mom to a college freshman, and some people have heard me tell this story before. My son, when he was going through the process, came to me with a great scattergram that he had found how, with college parties on one side and academic reputation on the other side. And he thought this was the greatest scattergram that he had ever found. And that certainly wasn't the driving factor, but he was excited about it. And we talked about how that scattergram and the schools and where they fell played into the process and how it made him think about different schools. So I encourage parents, even if your kids come up with outrageous things that you don't necessarily think should be top priorities, that you listen to them, that you hear why they're excited about some criteria or another, and try to meet them where they are. Students, obviously you're going to complete and submit the applications, all of the forms, you're going to write your essays. So that all goes as part of the college process itself. When it comes to working, Judy, can you go back? When it comes to working with your teachers and your counselor, you want to make sure to provide all of the forms or surveys in a timely fashion. I say to my students all the time that an emergency on the part of a student is not an emergency on the part of a teacher or on the part of a counselor. So it's really important that kids meet all of the deadlines, not just for the applications themselves, but for the counselors, for the teachers. For the November 1st early deadlines that Allison Lockridge mentioned earlier, the counselors are looking to have all the documents that we require in our hand by October 1st. We will write the vast majority of our letters of recommendation by that November 1st deadline. And so it's really important for us to be able to take a look at how many letters of recommendation we need to have completed and out the door with all of the forms by that November 1st deadline. And then if you're sending test scores, you need to make sure to arrange to have those test scores sent by either the College Board for the SATs or the subject tests, or by the ACT if you've taken the ACT. If they require official test scores. Some schools, obviously, as we've talked about, are test optional. And there's a growing number of schools that will take the scores as self-reported and only require students to send an official score if the student decides to enroll at that institution. So that's something you can certainly keep in mind as you're deciding which scores to pay for. Things that students should not do. Students should not change their college list after your fall meeting with your counselor. Once we get back to school in September, each of the seniors will meet with their school counselor to really go over and finalize their plan. Some kids come back and in that first meeting, they know exactly which schools are on their list and they're good to go. And that will be the only meeting that they'll have with their school counselor because they're in such great shape. But once they've told their school counselor what their list is, thinking they're in such great shape, we don't want to find out 2 months later that you've taken some schools off and added other schools, but didn't bother to circle back with your counselor. Other kids will come into that first meeting in September, and they'll need a lot of work to do. They'll need a little bit more support than some other students. So we might meet with them 2, 3, 4, 5 times to get them to the point where their list is finalized and we think they're good to go. But again, once that list is finalized, we assume that it's finalized and that there won't be changes unless the kids circle back with their counselor again. You don't want to hand in transcript request forms. This kind of goes part and parcel with the other point. Don't hand in transcript request forms to the guidance assistant without first talking to your school counselor. You also want to, as I said earlier, tell your teachers well in advance. We suggest that you start asking teachers this spring semester to write your letters of recommendation and then circle back with them in the fall to let them know what your first deadline is. One of my seniors only asked teachers a week before Christmas to write letters of recommendation for his January 1st deadline this year. Needless to say, the teachers were very gracious and didn't want to leave the kids stranded, but they were not happy that they gave him such a little time. So we really don't want to put our teachers in that kind of position. We want to give them plenty of notice about when your first deadline is going to be. We also, again, don't want to change those lists or be focused solely on reach and far reach schools. We want to make sure that we've got target and likely schools on the list. Again, in terms of finalizing that list, I think we really just want to hammer that home. You don't want to tell us that you're applying someplace and then never bother sending the application. We might think this student's got a great list. They're really covered. We've sent our school documents to X and Y school. We think those are their safeties. So, and those are great choices for the school. Lo and behold, we don't know that the student didn't apply to those schools. April rolls around and all of a sudden the student doesn't have a home to go to because they never bothered to come back and tell us that they decided not to apply to the only 2 likely schools that had been on their list where we sent our school materials. So just really important to work together with your school counselor. All right, moving on to the role of the parents. As I said, I'm the mom of a college freshman, so I promise you will survive the process. Allison spoke earlier about the once a week meetings. And again, one of my older colleagues who's retired, she had recommended the weekly meeting for years. I had recommended it to dozens and dozens of families over my career as a school counselor. But when it came time to work with our son through the process, my husband and I have very different styles of parenting. And my son was at his wit's end with some of the questions. And so we ended up coming to a family agreement that that Sunday night meeting was going to be the best way to sort of navigate the process for us. So then the parent who wanted to ask a lot of questions on a daily basis was kind of curtailed, and Ben only had to answer those questions on Sunday nights. And he was pretty good about tackling any tasks so that he didn't have to get pestered along the way. So I highly encourage families to think about that strategy as well. Parents, you're really there to be support and encouraging. There are things that the kids need to do, and a little reminder, a little nudge is great, but we don't want to overwhelm the kids. We don't want to take over the process for them. We want parents to be mindful of their own biases and ideas about certain schools. Keep an open mind. School counselors are going to suggest schools that you may never have heard of, but they may be just the perfect school for your kids. Again, I have a senior on my caseload this year who got into an early decision school, and the family came back and said how happy they were that we had suggested that school that they had never heard of, and their child was thrilled to be accepted early decision to that school. So I really encourage you to keep an open mind, keep your own ideas about where you think your kid would be best off. certainly incorporate it into the conversation. But if your child doesn't agree, make sure that, again, they're running the process. We definitely want to support an ethical approach to the admissions process. Obviously, we've all heard about all of the scandals that have taken place in the last handful of years. And so we just want to encourage families to be above board and, to approach this with an ethical process. When it comes to the applications themselves, as much as you want to be a help, we really want the kids to be the ones completing the application. And so please, again, it's fine to sit with your kids to help them. There's some parent information on there. So your kids will need some support in completing that parent information, but we don't want you taking their login information and going in and working all on your own on their application. Not one of the bullet points on here, but I realize that I want to mention the brag sheets. We've talked about those a little bit. It's such an important part of the counselor letter of recommendation. There are so many great stories and things that parents have about their kids that might be well suited for the counselor letter of recommendation. I know firsthand how hard they can be to fill out. You really want, as a mom, you want to make sure that you're telling all the great stuff about your kids. Those brag sheets are up on the high school's website now, so feel free to download them and start thinking about your answers to questions, because the more thoughtful the answers you can give your school counselor in those brag sheets, the better equipped your counselor is going to be to put together the letters of recommendation for your sons and daughters. When I'm writing my letters of recommendation, I'm often quoting great stories and ideas and activities that the kids have been involved in straight from those parent brag sheets. So I really encourage you to spend some time with that as well. And the role of the school counselor, as obvious, hopefully it's obvious, we're there to offer suggestions and guidance about colleges that we think are good fits for your students based on the ideas and the preferences that the students are sharing with us. And also how we've gotten to know the kids, what we might see as great matches for your kids. Sometimes kids will come into my office and tell me straight off the bat, it has to be bigger than Greenwich High School. But as I've gotten to know the student over 3 years, I'll have a reason to think maybe a little bit of a smaller school is something to think about. And so I'll share with the kids like why I think they might be a great fit at a smaller school. So we'll try to provide that kind of support and guidance. We also, spent time earlier in the presentation talking about the bell curve. We want to make sure that that list is well balanced when it comes time to finalizing the list. And then obviously we're going to write the counselor letter of recommendation. So as I just was talking about the parent brag sheet, there's the student brag sheet. I know for me, I love writing my letters of recommendation for my seniors and really being able to reflect on all of the great things that the kids have done and accomplished over the 3.5 years that I have worked with them as students. So we do enjoy the process. The letters of recommendation are very personal. I think the students at Greenwich High School are lucky to have counselors who care so much about those letters of recommendation. As someone who worked in college admissions for a number of years, I know that not all schools put the care into their letters of recommendation that our counselors do. So I'm proud of all the school counselors at Greenwich High School and the care that they put into writing those letters for our students. All right, so now we'll move on to talking just a little bit about financing your education. I know sometimes it can be a difficult conversation, but it's really important for families to talk with their students about the role of finances in the college process. A number of years ago, I had a student get to the very end of her college search. She had done everything right. She wrote great essays. She got into great places. She was so excited. And then her parents told her for the first time in April that they could not afford to send her to her dream schools. And she was absolutely crushed. She had no idea that her family's financial situation was part of the decision-making process. And so when push came to shove and her parents told her that she had to pick one of the Connecticut state schools because that was all she could afford, it was a really difficult time for her. So I really encourage families for whom the financial process is part of the process to have open and honest conversations about what that's going to look like for your kids. There are so many great tools now online. Net price calculators are required to be on every college's website so that you can take a look at what the financial aid package might look like. Right now, you'll see that often referred to as the expected family contribution. But some of you may be listening to the news and have heard that just last week it was announced that the financial aid process is going to be revamped. And for the current juniors, for your financial aid process, by the time you're actually filling out those FAFSA forms, it will be referred to as the Student Aid Index. So while you're going through this process, I think you're going to hear both of those terms used kind of, and they mean ultimately the same thing: a family's ability to pay for an education and how the college is likely to support you, with a need-based financial aid. So the need-based financial aid is really that when the income and the assets don't necessarily match the $75,000 price tag that's attached to some schools. That's the need-based financial aid. And hopefully colleges will be the number one source of helping you fill that gap between the cost of attendance and your ability to pay for the education. For families who might have the ability to pay for a $75,000 education but not want to do that, many families will also come into the college meeting hoping to talk about merit scholarships. So these are certainly given out by many schools. Oftentimes, though, they're going to be more on the target and even more on the likely side of things, where the college is really trying to attract a student of an academic caliber. And so they're basically willing to award that merit scholarship money to entice the students to come to their school. For students with financial need, the Greenwich Scholarship Association is a wonderful organization in town. It allows our students to really fill out one scholarship application for dozens of scholarships that are offered within the town of Greenwich under one umbrella organization. So for students who have the financial need, this is a great opportunity. And you will get notifications next year when that application is open. We will also be holding very specific financial aid workshops in the early fall. So definitely keep an eye out for those, and we'll give you much more information on the financial aid process. All right, at this point, I'm going to turn it back over to Alice and Lockridge for a little bit.
Thanks, Danielle. So I'm just going to touch upon a couple things that happen in the College and Career Center that are relevant to all of you right now. I know you all are inundated with emails, but please keep an eye out for emails each week from me. I send out the College and Career Update, which is a weekly newsletter that's sent to all juniors and seniors. And while some of the material in the beginning of the year was more relevant for seniors, now moving into the winter and spring, I think juniors will find it more relevant. I do run a number of workshops for juniors on developing your college list throughout the winter. I will send those out via email and also put those in the College and Career Update. They will both be in person and virtual. And then later in the spring, I run a number of workshops on college essay writing, both for the main essay and the supplemental essays that we really encourage juniors to take advantage of. And just a couple other things. I mentioned the college representative visits earlier in the presentation, but I really want to stress the importance of these. Unfortunately, they haven't been as well attended in the past couple of years. And, they're really valuable for students to take advantage of. So what they are, they're college admission representatives. They're actually the readers of your application that come to Greenwich High School, and they will come in the fall. And usually we have close to 200 colleges. And, they basically come and give a brief information session. But it's important for students to attend those sessions because, again, it's a very valuable way to show that demonstrated interest, and also to really just even hear tips about their application or interviews, what they may expect. So, while you won't see anything for that this year, just really kind of keep it in the back of your mind that, starting, right in that first week of school, we'll have all of the rep visits. The calendar will be available on SCORE and also in the College and Career Update each week. And lastly, the college night, unfortunately, was canceled this October, but many of you probably attended in sophomore year. So that will happen again in the fall of next year. So that is something that's coordinated through our department and is, just a really valuable evening to attend. Typically we have close to 250 colleges that come to that evening. And I think we may have mentioned a lot about SCORE throughout the presentation, so I'm not sure much needs to be mentioned here except for, just kind of stressing that, this is really how transcripts and letters of recommendations will be sent out to colleges. So, we're going to guide students again through this process, but students will need to invite their teachers on SCORE and can do so later in the spring or early in the fall. And again, we're going to help you with that, a little bit later. And this is also how they're going to request transcripts. So, it is really important to just, know that that is going to be all, happening through SCORE this year. Okay, we have a few other, kind of nuts and bolts and, tying up the presentation, and then we'll open it up for questions. I'm going to turn it back over to Danielle.
Perfect. I just want to talk quickly about the Common Application. As of today, we expect the 2021-22 application to go live on August 1st, as it typically does every year. But until we get a little further along into the spring and hear that announcement, we won't know definitively. You don't want to invite counselors and teachers through the Common Application. I know there was even a question about being able to opt out of SCORE, but it really is important to the school counselors and Greenwich High School that we have one unified process, and using SCORE is how we're going to continue to, not continue with SCORE, but we are going to continue to have one unified process next year using SCORE for submitting all the teacher and counselor letters of recommendation. So we appreciate everybody making sure not to invite us through the Common Application. One highlight just to make on the activities list, I know someone mentioned earlier that you can have up to 10 activities in the activities list. You're limited to 150 characters for the description. And I would really encourage the students to be very thoughtful in how you use those 150 characters, really cramming it in with as much descriptive language as you can, even in the title of the activity, putting some extra description into that title of the activity or into the title of your role within the organization. As was also mentioned earlier, the essay has a 650 word limit, and it is strictly enforced. So you really want to be mindful of that. School counselors are great at helping kids slice words out when they're trying to get down to that limit, if you need help with that kind of thing. The essay prompts are typically announced in March. They've been the same prompts for the last couple of years. So I guess we'll be seeing when March rolls around whether they're sticking with the same prompts again for another year. Then the supplemental essays are as Allison, I think, mentioned earlier, maybe it was Christina, the supplemental essays are primarily going to be focused around the demonstrated interests and what makes a campus stand out for the students. Some of them are a little bit more unique and off the wall, and they're looking at a student's creativity, and that's fine too. So just really paying attention to those, different supplemental essays. And then the next application that some of our students will be using is the Coalition application. The Coalition does have a locker for information that students can set up even starting now. Maybe some of you even already have a Coalition application and have some stuff in the locker there. Some of the schools that use the Coalition are using October 15th deadlines. There are just a couple of schools that are Coalition only schools, meaning that you can't use the Common Application or the school's own website, that the Coalition is the exclusive application for just those few schools there. The Coalition application does allow for self-reported grades from freshman to junior year. The Common Application does also have separate self-reported grades for some schools that are now requiring the self-reported grades. The essay for the Coalition application is recommended to be at 550 words. So again, you can often use the same essay that you wrote for a Common Application school, but you do want to do a little bit of editing to get that down closer to the 550 word limit if you're using the Coalition application. All right, and so then the components of the senior packet, the brag sheet, the self-evaluation, they're really the same thing. This is an opportunity for students to reflect and share information with us, the counselors, so that we know some things about you that you might never have gotten around to telling us, or some things that were really exciting to you that you did in high school that maybe you haven't shared with us. The student brag sheet really gives us an opportunity to see in to some of the things that are important that we might want to highlight in your letter of recommendation. The activity sheet is a part of the brag sheet, or you can submit a resume in lieu of completing the activity sheet. On the Greenwich High School website, there's also a sample resume, so if students need help with that, and we'll often do resume workshops. Probably a lot of you even have gotten started with a resume earlier in high school with your school counselor. We already talked about the importance of the parent brag sheets, the informal comments, at least one of each of these, one from a teacher and one from a non-teacher. And we want this to be a different teacher than the one that's doing that formal letter of recommendation for you. When I'm writing my counselor letter of recommendation, I always want to talk about, of course, the student as a student. The counselors know the students in the way that we've gotten to know them, thought processes behind certain decisions. We know about some of the struggles, and we might highlight how students have overcome struggles. But it's always great to be able to quote a teacher and what a teacher sees as the areas of strength for a student in the classroom. And then obviously we hope that students have done things beyond the classroom. And so being able to, again, if a student is an athlete, to be able to share some comments directly from a coach, or if a student has been in a club for 3 or 4 years, to be able to share some feedback from that club advisor about the role that the student has played in that activity. And so that's where these informal comments can come into play as we're writing your letters of recommendation. All right, so next steps, scheduling the junior college conference. I know some of you may already have your college conference set up, and that's great. If not, then you can reach out to the guidance assistant in your child's house. And this is really a great thing for parents to do because we want parents to be a part of the college conference. So if you give a call to the guidance assistant, then our guidance assistants can talk to you about your availability while looking at the school counselor's schedule and while also looking at the student's schedule. As Allison said, we want these meetings to be about an hour long. And so that's just about a full block for a student. We don't really want to take them out of class. So we're generally going to try to hold the college conference when the kids have either an open or a learning center. And so the guidance assistants are great in talking with parents about where we find that mutual sweet spot where the student is free, the counselor is free, and it works for mom or dad. Obviously, we want to consider the timing for campus visits. Right now, obviously, we have the opportunity to do virtual visits, paying attention. Hopefully, as the spring and summer roll along, we will have an opportunity to get out and let the kids visit the campuses in person. As you come into that college conference, your school council will work together with you to develop a standardized testing plan. As we talked about, obviously, all of the juniors will be taking the SATs at the high school in the school-based testing in March. But what other tests are going to be a part of your plan? And so we'll work together on setting up your testing plan. You want to be thoughtful about who's going to write those letters of recommendation and get those out there. Most importantly, the students want to keep those grades up, get your grades up. If you are still wishing that your grades were a little bit higher as we finish up the first semester and look towards second semester. So never too late to put a little bit more effort into those grades, or as you go into senior year to remember the importance and keep up your grades. The junior folder. Obviously, none of us have junior folders in our hand. You will get folders when you come back to school next week. The kids can pick them up in their houses from either their school counselor or from the guidance assistants. All of the sheets that we talked about on the previous slides, that's the primary information that you'll find in that junior folder. And then I just wanted to spend a minute talking about the summer. Obviously, we want to continue making sure that we're super organized in the summer as we head into the fall. The summer is a great time to do some more college visits if you haven't been able to do them so far, and to really get started on the application work itself. When that common application itself opens in August, that's a great time before school starts to get in and start that tedious like data entry stuff. With the common application announced, the essay prompts rather announced in March, July can be a great time to get started on a rough draft of the main Common App essay so that on August 1st, when the common application opens and you can see what those supplemental essays are with a draft of your main essay already written, in August, you can turn your attention to some drafts of supplemental essays. And every year, the kids who had gotten a jump start on those essays are so happy that their process goes just that much more smoothly because they've gotten that piece out of the way. The kids who have not done their essay, not started it at all, definitely feel like it's an extra stressor on them when they're also trying to finish the search process and keep up with their classwork. So I definitely put a strong emphasis on thinking about drafting up all of those essays in the summer. And then, of course, volunteering, working, whatever it is that you're doing, colleges love to see and hear that you've done something with your summer besides hit the beach, hit the pool, take a nice vacation. They want to know that you've done something meaningful in the summertime. Obviously, we still don't know what summer 2021 is going to look like, what summer jobs, what volunteering will look like, but finding something that's productive and meaningful to do. So again, be giving that some thought as we come into this spring and you're thinking about what your summer will look like. All right, I think at this point we will take a few questions. We'll take those out of the question and answer feed and just kind of try to share those across all of us.
Danielle, I just wanted to make one correction. I realized we didn't update the slide for the coalition application. So University of Maryland and University of Georgia are using the common application this year. So I see there are a couple questions about the coalition application. Either the common app or the coalition is fine. Colleges could care less which application it is. But I will say that most colleges are using the common app and not all of them are using the coalition. But Georgia and Maryland used to use only the coalition app, which is why some students used the coalition in the past, but this year they also signed on with the common app. So apologize for not updating that slide.
So maybe, what's a good place to start looking for available scholarships? So I mean, I know our college and career update, I would definitely say, there are a lot available for seniors. So if as juniors, you can look through the college and career updates that Allison has posted to the Greenwich High School Guidance website under the Career Center. You could start looking at those because the scholarships will be available again at the same time of year next year when you guys are seniors. Also, there are a couple of really good, programs such as Fast Web. It's not like there are 10, great databases out there. Most of them contain the same national scholarship. So Fast Web is a good one besides the college and career update. Do we expect a large amount of schools to be test optional for the class of 2022 as well? And what do you guys think about that?
So some of the schools that went test optional did go test optional for a pilot of 3 years, and some went for 1 year. I do expect that a large number will still be test optional next year. Some schools that did only pilot it for 1 year have not made a decision yet. But I also want to just kind of keep in mind that many schools were test optional even before the pandemic. A great website, which I can put in the chat here, I think is called Fair Test. And that website lists all of the test optional schools. So, kind of the long and short of it is I do expect that a number of schools will be test optional again next year. Maybe not all of them, but like there were this year, but probably a lot.
And, what does write thank you notes mean, when visiting campus? So it's always good whether you're visiting a college campus and engaging with admissions officers there, or whether you're talking to an admissions office through a virtual meeting or in-person meeting at Greenwich High School to try and, get their name and send maybe a quick thank you note. So it could be a literal, thank you note, or it could be a quick email to say, thank you, I enjoyed meeting you, I appreciate your answer to my question. It's just, again, a way to show demonstrated interest and to, kind of show that you are a good communicator as well.
I think the thank you notes also, are an opportunity to continue the lines of communication. So you might have questions later on, and then you're working to develop a relationship with that admissions person at some of the schools.
And then, should students take both the SAT and ACT? I don't know what portion of students do take both, maybe a third, Yeah.
I would say even less. I think it's really just finding the exam. The exams have different strategies to them. So I think it's really important to find the exam that works best for your student, or that you truly feel shows your best ability to show your skills. Taking both of them just to take both of them, you can, but I oftentimes don't see it work to benefit the student. I think I could count on 2 hands over 9 years of school counseling the amount of students who scored the same way on both exams.
I would say that I think it's probably higher than a third, because we do give the SAT in school to all of our juniors. And I see a growing trend of students taking the ACTs. I
I
think
mean,
a
it's
lot.
much easier to get a free practice now. You know, we offer one free practice every year, but the test prep companies have tons of free practice opportunities. So it's very easy to try both, and then to see which one you maybe like better, feel more comfortable with, score higher on. And some people just like to cover their bases, you know, take one of each and, you know, see how it goes. So we really support whatever, a student wants to do, and, having personal conversations with both your house counselor and maybe with Mrs. Lockridge in the Career Center is a good way to go about that. Are we using SCORE instead of Naviance? So for this school year, for those of you who have been comfortable with Naviance and want to continue researching Naviance, the data is all in there. So that, Naviance is not going away this year, but we are, we've spent almost a whole year, doing the research. We are, feeling very good about SCORE. So it is quite likely that we will make a decision, between now and next fall, that we are going to transition to SCORE instead of Naviance for the 21-22 school year. So that is our intention right now. But this year there's a lot of movement. So I don't want to commit right now, but it looks like we're going in that direction. If a school uses both the Common App and Coalition, is one better than the other? I would say no. Yeah, I can't imagine that. But do you think the Coalition people prefer Coalition? Yeah.
No, I mean, I think if there's any schools that take the coalition exclusively, then obviously you have to do the coalition. But the vast majority of the schools our students apply to are on the common application. So I think that that's an application that most of our students are going to be using. So.
And here's a good one about recommendations. So when should students ask teachers for their letter of recommendation, and what's the difference between formal and informal?
So students should probably begin asking after their junior conference. Usually I like to talk to my students about which teachers they're considering for their formal letters of recommendation, but it should definitely take place in the spring semester before the end of the school year. You should not be asking your teacher well into your senior year. Sometimes teachers have a certain amount of letters that they're going to write. So spring semester, absolutely, maybe talk to your school counselor first. And then in regards to the formal versus informal, the formal letters of recommendation are definitely the ones that go to the colleges directly. Teachers might ask for you to complete a survey or provide them with specific information which you would like for them to include within their letter. Informals are roughly 4 to 6 sentences. It's maybe a paragraph. It's not as extensive as a formal letter of recommendation, but it's what we are able to, as school counselors, incorporate within our letters of recommendation. So oftentimes I have quotes or blurbs, and as Mrs. Nash had shared, it will allow me to speak to the student in a specific club or activity, or it will allow me to speak to the student as a student in the classroom.
And what is the earliest that we can submit transcripts, recommendations, and the school reports? I would say to you that, November 1 used to be the earliest for many, many, many years. Now, sometimes we can certainly be ready, for an October 15th deadline. The transcript itself will be ready probably within a couple of weeks into the start of the new school year. But the teacher letters of recommendation and the counselor letter of recommendation certainly will take more time. So that doesn't mean the student cannot apply earlier than, November 1st. But, have that conversation. If you end up applying to a school that really would like to see your application earlier than November 1, just have that conversation with your counselor and with your teachers, because it's the letters of recommendation that take the most time, and we need the most lead time on that. There's a couple of questions about, school day SAT. Before the pandemic, juniors were literally required to take the school day SAT. And that is because that was an obligation that Greenwich High School had to the state of Connecticut for accountability purposes. So last year, that SAT obligation was waived. This year, I do not know whether it will be waived, but it's March 24th. You should anticipate that as a junior, you probably will need to come into Greenwich High School to take the test, but Ms. Tulata will let you know more about that when we get closer to that date. Any surveys or quizzes we can take a look at to recommend colleges we should look into. So both Naviance, SCORE, and the College Board have a college search feature. So that college search, by putting in the different like criteria you're interested in, will definitely net you different like lists of colleges, and that will help you, understand like what your interests, are result in. But the other thing is we do have some links on our website and in the little red folders. Stephen Antonoff, I think Stephen is his first name, but he is a gentleman in the college admissions field, and he has some really nice surveys and questionnaires on his website that we have posted that basically help you consider, what are the values I have? Why do I want to attend college? What are the features of a college that are important to me? So those are really nice tools if you really are wanting to start like from, a step back to say like, what is it that I'm thinking about? So we do have those available and linked. Should you have a standardized test score before you schedule your junior meeting? Not necessarily, no, because there's plenty of time for follow-up meetings. Lists regarding recommended summer programs and pre-college programs. Would they be in the college and career update possibly? So like summer programs, things like that?
We don't put summer programs in the college and career update, but in terms of kind of pre-college courses, really most college campuses offer pre-college courses. So, if you are interested in, say, George Washington University, or you want to be in DC, you could look right on their website and there'll be pre-college course information on there. And then we also have the summer fair that the PTA organizes each year. And, there are plenty of summer programs that come to that summer fair. But in terms of coursework on college campuses, like I said, most colleges have them.
And how will parents get access to SCORE? As soon as we onboard the juniors, we'll definitely start with the junior parents as well, and then get everybody on board. Our database administrator works not only for Greenwich High School, but for the entire district. And he is a very busy man doing all the state reports for January. We're on his to-do list, and we will get all that up there in the near future. Do we need to know what colleges we're planning to apply to before asking teachers for recommendations? No, you do not. How accessible are counselors over the summer if a question or concern arises? They are not. I get a lot of emails in the summer wondering why their counselor isn't, answering their email. And it's because they're off for the summer, just like all the other teachers. So, plan ahead. We're going to give you plenty of time this spring to ask your questions and get prepared. Again, there's a lot of information on our website. I work in the summer about probably 4 or 5 out of the weeks that we're there. I can answer some general questions or point you in the right direction, but I cannot, give you, college counseling advice that is more detailed. Let's see. Can you confirm you need 3 formal recommendations? No, 1 or 2 formal recommendations. I don't think there's any college out there that would require.
Well, in the breakdown, it said 2 teacher, 1 STEM, 1 humanities, 1 counselor, and then informal. So that's correct. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, the counselor letter is one of those things that we kind of like, goes without saying. It's actually kind of a required part of the process. Oh. Okay. Someone's asking a very good question because there is a little bit of a difference. Should materials like brag sheets and resume be brought to the junior college meeting or sent before the meeting? There are counselors who require certain things before your meeting, and there are counselors who do not require certain things before your meeting. So please just connect with your own individual school counselor and do what your own counselor asks you to do. They all have a very well worked out process, but it is a little more individualized, which is fine. So just do what they ask you to do and you'll be in good shape. Does it look better to have more than 2 recommendations? No. What's the difference between the March 13th SAT and the March 24th that you can take at Greenwich High School? The one at Greenwich High School is free and it's during the school day, and all the other ones that are on a Saturday you would have to pay for, and they may or may not be based at Greenwich High School. Can we add essay to the school administered SAT? No, Greenwich High School only offers the multiple choice portion of the SAT. What GPA should we use in the scatter chart, weighted or unweighted? The only GPA that we have at Greenwich High School is a weighted GPA. So that's what we have. If I'm taking an ACT, is it mandatory I take the school day test offered in SAT? We will find that out. Ms. Chulada will let everybody know whether it's mandatory. And it's totally up to the state. That's not a decision that we have. How does the application process change for students who maybe have moved from another country or things like that? So maybe one of the counselors want to talk about like how transfer transcripts and things like that work.
So when a student transfers to Greenwich High School, your transcript will show transfer and then the course that the student completed and the amount of credit that they earned with a P for pass. The only grades that will get calculated into a cumulative GPA are the grades for which a student earns at Greenwich High School. So if it's their junior year, they will only have 1 year's worth of classes onto their GPA. However, we will send the transcripts from your past schools to the colleges as well, and they can create a new GPA based off of all of that information. So we are obviously here to support any student and family, and I know that I have at least a handful of students who, this year as seniors who transferred from different schools in different countries, and they haven't had a problem with the college process at all.
A couple of questions about GPA. So again, we only have a weighted GPA. What is the GPA out of? 5-ish? Because, really we say our base is a 4.0, but because of all the weighting and the honors and AP courses that we have, some students have between a 4.0 and a 5.0. So, I would say maybe students up the very top are going to have about a 5.0 because of the weighting that we have. But do some colleges redo the GPA for themselves? Yes. So, the colleges are very familiar with the Greenwich High School transcript. They understand what the GPA means. They understand what your courses are. So they will be, kind of reading your transcript within the context of Greenwich High School and their knowledge of Greenwich High School. Is GHS offering the ACT for GHS students? Yes, we are. You do have to register for it because this is like a one-off year. We never have given the ACT at Greenwich High School. We've offered before, but they haven't needed us. But because of COVID, ACT very smartly gave high schools the ability to only test their own students on a Saturday with the ACT. So we offered one for the, primarily for the seniors in the fall, and we're offering another one on April 17th. I did already send out that special code you need to log on. After, maybe not tomorrow, but certainly over the weekend, I'll send a nice email out to all the juniors and parents with some of these like smaller details in there so that you have everything you need in one place. A couple of really good questions about, extracurricular activities. How can a student that has not had their athletics, not had their, normal clubs, kind of show that they have been engaged and involved? It's a tough question.
The only thing I'll say to that is that, everybody's in the same situation. And we've been hearing that over and over from college admissions is that, you're not the only student in this situation. So it's understandable.
I will add, though, that a lot of the GHS clubs are still meeting virtually. So if you haven't ever joined a club at Greenwich High School, there still are opportunities to get involved with clubs and organizations now through the virtual meetings that they're doing. So hop on to the student activities like portion of the high school website, take a look at the clubs and activities, see what information they have up, see how they're meeting, how often they're meeting, and maybe there is something that you can get involved with even now.
There was also an additional information section on the Common Application where you can share more information should you need. I don't know if Common App is continuing with this, but for the 2020-2021 year, they did have a COVID question. So if the COVID pandemic had impacted you more than an average student, you could actually share a quick blurb about it. So there's lots of different areas, but there are lots of virtual options for students. So definitely take a look at the student activities website, like Mrs. Nash said, but also just know that colleges are understanding of different students' ability to be involved given this, but maybe there's other ways of getting involved within the community or supporting others.
And what's the time frame? There's a question about like when you apply ED or EA, then what's the time frame, and are you limited from applying to other colleges? That is like kind of something that the students will work out, by talking to Ms. Lockridge or with their house counselor. Some students are super lucky and they have, I guess just applied to 1 or 2 schools. They get in, they didn't, end up doing a lot of extra work, but don't you guys think most students have to kind of do a parallel, Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. It's pretty rare these days to only submit 1 or 2 applications and be done. But the time frame is generally most early deadlines are around November 1st. And give or take a couple weeks, and decisions are typically released sometime in mid-December or mid-January. And early decision, you can only apply to 1 school early decision, so that's binding. So that's if you want to marry that 1 school, there's a contract that you sign with your parents, your counselor. And then there are, of course, some other schools that have some restrictive early action policies. I don't want to overwhelm you with all of that. So again, we're here to guide you through that. It's just, looking at each school policy, and what it is. That's basically the gist.
Yeah. And this is a good question, is when a school is test optional, will the school give preference to someone who chooses to test? That is also a it depends situation, and that is something we can help you with. Most of the colleges our students apply to understand that Greenwich Public Schools are doing everything we can to provide testing to students. Some who have been test optional for a very long time, no, they're not going to notice that you're one of the 50% of the kids who didn't give a test in. So we will help you with that. We do think it's important to take some tests, you know what I mean? Because, it may be that your test score will help you within the admissions process. But
I do think though that some of the schools though that went test optional just this year and were reporting the high volume, 45, 50, 60% of their freshman applicants did not submit test scores. And in most of those cases, it seemed like their acceptance rate for their early students mirrored that pretty closely, within a few percentage points. So again, I think it's definitely an individual conversation for each student to have with their counselor, but not to be disenfranchised by the idea of test optional.
And how much of a factor does maybe growth over time on a transcript play? Is that something that colleges are looking for?
I'll keep going. Definitely. I always, having worked in college admissions, in addition to working on the high school side of things, colleges are definitely looking for that growth over time. Colleges I always say to my students when we're in that junior college conference that all GPAs are not equal. So you could have 3 different students who have a 4.0 GPA, and one of them has been a steady 4.0, 4.0, 4.0, like all 3 years of high school. Someone else might have started out as a 4.3 A+ student in 9th grade, and then something happens and they trail off and their GPA is going down. And someone else has a little bit of a rocky start at the beginning of high school and their GPA is climbing up, up, and up. And obviously, there's something to be said for that student who is on that upward trajectory and has a junior GPA of a 4.3 or a 4.6. at Greenwich High School. In addition to the clubs and activities, maybe you didn't join much in 9th grade, but you've gotten your feet wet and joined some other things as the years have rolled along. So definitely growth over time is important.
Okay, so just, another couple of things. One person is asking about, financial aid and FAFSA. We mentioned very briefly about the financial aid process. Our Greenwich High School Planning Guide has a really nice section that you can actually start working on now. We mentioned that there is a net cost calculator on every college's website. So there's definitely research that can be done now about like the financial part of funding a college education. And we encourage you to look at, either our website or the GHS planning guide for that information and get started. And then athletic recruiting is, definitely interesting. Last year we had Wayne Mazzoni come and speak. He comes to speak at our school maybe every few years. So if the person who has asked about athletic recruiting would like to email me, I'd be happy to send you the link to his presentation last year. Athletic prowess, does help you sometimes get into college. That's an absolute, factor. We are, all the counselors are very experienced in working with students who have been recruited before. We kind of like help you get a sense of whether this is a very serious recruitment, whether it's just like kind of a general recruitment. So definitely speak to both your coaches in your sport and with the school counselors to let them know that you're, thinking that maybe your athletic ability will help you get into a school and they can help you figure that out. And then, a gap year. This is like a similar question that people have been worrying about for the class of 2022. Will colleges be having to accept fewer kids from 2022 because of the gap years from 2021? So I don't know what you guys are hearing about that.
Yeah,
From the majority of colleges, they've said that they don't have like a pretty equal number of gap year students. Allison, I don't know if you've heard something different.
Yeah, and I would say, if there was any concern, it would have been more for this class than juniors. But we haven't really seen much of an impact to this date. And, if you listen to various webinars from directors of admissions, they're really clear about making room, whether that's expanding class sizes, getting creative, but, making sure that that's not going to hurt, incoming students.
And then here's a question I don't think we have the answer to, but based upon our experience with the current seniors who applied ED, do we know what percentage submitted test scores or did not? This is where our 2020 class of 2021 college book will be very helpful to the junior class. That type of information, like how many people went ED, how many people submitted test scores, all that kind of stuff is going to be, in there. If we have any insights, that like our more group insights like that, we'll certainly be talking about it with each other and then, dispersing that information as the spring goes on.
Judy, I don't know that the college book would actually tell us whether the students submitted the test scores, because if they,
you're right, because they would just put one in our database. Oh, you're right.
Yeah, but many colleges are putting out their percentages right now of students that submitted testing. I mean, the schools that I've been hearing about are really generally around that 50th percentile, But I think more, stats will be available certainly at the end of the year from specific colleges.
And do colleges require laboratory science courses? I believe that they do, and some majors would also require lab sciences, but all of the science courses at Greenwich High School are lab sciences. So, I think so. All right. Well, thank you all for sticking with us until the very end. I know this was a long presentation. It always is every year, but we hope that it was helpful. And, again, we look forward to working with you throughout the spring. Bye, everybody.
Good night.
Bye.
Everyone.